Well, hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Inside Whitehall with me, Jonathan Gullis.
And me, James Starkie.
Well, here we are, back again, James, and what another week in Westminster. The drama of 2026 does not seem to be ending anytime soon. I think it'd be mad for us to miss the Andy Burnham versus Keir Starmer drama that arrived at the end of last week. First of all, for those who maybe don't know, although you must be living under a rock if you don't know, Keir Starmer was presented with a by-election that I'm sure he was delighted to have on his doorstep. The by-election just happened to be in the Greater Manchester mayoral area, and Andy Burnham said, "Hey everyone, I'm interested in standing." But there was one snag. Because he's a sitting mayor, Labour's National Executive Committee, NEC as it's often referred to, had the right to convene and decide whether or not they would even give Andy Burnham permission to potentially go before the membership of Gorton and Denton. And lo and behold, on an 8-1 vote, they chose to not give Andy Burnham permission. Lucy Powell, another Greater Manchester MP, the only one on Labour's NEC, who is also the deputy leader of the Labour Party, voting to allow Andy Burnham to stand. Keir Starmer using his vote against. And Shabana Mahmood, the chair of the NEC, seemingly sitting on fences, not saying which way. Another Shabana Mahmood classic, I think it's fair to say there. So we now have a very moany set of backbench Labour MPs, 50 apparently, who have signed a letter to Sir Keir Starmer saying let him stand. Today, on the 27th of January, as we record this, we have a letter from members in Gorton and Denton saying Andy Burnham should be allowed to go forward. But the timetable for this by-election is so tight. In fact, the end of February, in literally a month, basically, the voters of Gorton and Denton are going to go to the polls. It looks unlikely, and Labour is expected at the end of this week to announce its candidate. And as we're talking now, Reform UK is currently unveiling its candidate. I'll have a quick look to see who they say it is. And the Green Party is expected to announce theirs later today. And the reason I say that is because the polls show it is a Labour versus Reform versus Green Party fight if the polls and the MRPs that have been done are to be believed. So, James, first of all, that was a quick rattling of where we're at. But what I'm interested with you
Synopsis.
is the um the I'm interested to get from you, was Sir Keir Starmer right to block Burnham?
Well, I think the first thing to say is I'm tempted, if my digital skills were up to it, to start every single podcast with the tweet from the after the election, which is kind of some version of, I think there was an Andrew Marr one, for example, listen to the quiet, the grown-ups are back. This idea that Labour were going to usher in this period of calm, tranquil government. And as you said, since we've been back, but way into last year, that has been anything but the case. So we start again on something, and I think we'll touch on this in a bit. A bit interested to get your take. Something we know the public hates, which is internal politics of parties dominating the prime minister's time, the government's time, and that kind of stuff. To your point, what was really interesting to me, two things were interesting to me about the coverage of this. So one, towards the end of last week, what we knew is that the NEC have a role in choosing the shortlist. So it's not down to a bit simpler, I think, in the Tory and Reform, about who goes on the shortlist. But as usual with Labour, as you would expect, nothing is worth doing unless it's worth doing by committee. And so they have this committee, and they get to decide. So it was will they, won't they allow Andy Burnham to run? And the interesting thing to me is nobody that I could see, of notable journalists, was predicted the 8-1, which it was in the end. It was emphatic rejection of Andy, or if you like, moved by Keir Starmer. He kind of led this, and the work that Morgan McSweeney's done to kind of take control of the Labour Party. So in this instance, the evidence would suggest Morgan McSweeney's been very successful in that internal mechanics of the Labour Party, and that delivered for the PM, delivered a result for the PM. So I thought it was interesting that everyone kind of thought he'd get 3 or 4. And me and you have spoken to some Labour people we know, and actually, when you look at the unions involved, people aren't that surprised afterwards that they voted with the Prime Minister. But I thought that was very interesting. That really, again, I thought the lobby was caught a bit cold. I thought their predictions were quite far out, actually. And then there's obviously a debate about whether or not the Prime Minister should get into this, and I'm really interested in your view on this. You know the top of internal politics. You've seen leadership machinations really closely in the Tory party. To me, if Burnham had have run and won, his speech in Gorton, where for his acceptance to be an MP, would have essentially been his leadership speech. It would have kicked off. Now we know the date. I think it's in 4 weeks. Very quick by-election before the end of February. I think, isn't it, Jonathan?
Yeah, I think it's 27th, but I'll just double check. I think it's pretty sure it's the 27th of February.
So before we even hit March of this year,
26, right, James? Sorry, 26.
Thank you. We'd have essentially had the kickoff of Andy Burnham's leadership campaign, and the weeks of speculation that would have seen, and the distraction that would have caused in Number 10, wider government, MPs, stuff that, and also the undercurrent of which the public hate. The public hate this, and they showed this at the last election. The Labour Party should know. The two parties that should know best is not your new party Reform. It's my party, the Conservative Party, who were elected out of office partly because of this, and it's the Labour Party because they were given a huge majority because they kept pointing this out. So the fact they don't seem to understand this, to me, I find incredible, and I find it incredible there's a debate about whether this is good. We've got a few days of Andy Burnham. They're going to write letters. Maybe they'll lose this by-election. That'll last till the end of March. But once that's over with, I don't think we're necessarily in for some great Labour government, but I definitely think it's in the country, the economy, and the Prime Minister's best interest, and they all align. That's not why he did it. He did it for survival. But they all align to not have Andy Burnham skulking around Westminster with not very much to do apart from destabilise the PM. I
So
don't know,
look,
you tell me.
no, look, so my view is if Andy Burnham's allowed to run, Andy Burnham is more than likely to win that by-election because people who are Labour voters would have stuck with Labour because I think Andy Burnham, as we've seen from many polls, is the only person. In fact, Sam Coates and his podcast today said that Andy Burnham is the only Labour person that would the public believe would do a better job than Sir Keir Starmer, as in Wes Streeting, Angela Rayner actually would be seen to do a worse job in the current public opinion's minds. Thought that was very interesting. So I think he would have secured the Labour votes. He would have sucked up a lot of Green Party vote because at the end of the day, we are seeing, as we saw in the Caerphilly by-election, this progressive left alliance where voters are tactically voting in order to keep Reform out, and Reform obviously being part of that three-way fight for the Gaunton and Denton seat. So I think that electorally, it's in some ways a bad move because I don't think this election is now guaranteed for Labour. My gut instinct, it's now, without Andy Burnham, a Reform versus Green Party fight. Now, there you go. I've put a prediction and a target on my back when we come do the pod in the end of February. But for me, there will now be, I suspect, a significant movement by the Greens to say, do you dislike Sir Keir Starmer? Do you feel that people like Andy Burnham in the Labour Party are no longer welcome? That left-wing kind of politics is not welcome in Labour. Do you want to stop Reform? And do you want to see progressive politics in your area? And if you look at some of the demographics, there is in a part of the patch, the Manchester area of the patch is significantly large Muslim population as well, where we've seen when that vote has been mobilised, it's gone to independents or it has gone to parties like your party. But in this case, those voters are being told to vote Green. So therefore, I think that we'll see a Caerphilly style rally behind a progressive left movement. But Reform UK are rightly going to throw everything at it because they think they can also attract the anti-Keir Starmer vote, as well as disillusioned voters with the entire political system, and hoover up a lot of that Conservative vote, albeit small, along with their net favourability in the pollings at the moment for Reform UK, combined together just gets them over the line and maybe gets them a Runcorn style victory, very narrow. So it's going to be fascinating. However, you are correct. If I was in 10 Downing Street, if I was a Labour MP, I would have been on the view you can't let Andy Burnham run because every time, even as a backbench MP, you're doing media between now and the end of February. Do you want Andy Burnham to win? Will you be campaigning for Andy Burnham? If Andy Burnham was to be elected, do you want him in the cabinet? If it's not in the cabinet, would you like him to be leader one day? That would have been every interview every day for the next 4 or 5 weeks. And then if Andy Burnham won, as we expect he would do, and even Nigel Farage has conceded, it would have been very challenging for Reform UK to beat Andy Burnham, because he would have hoovered up the anti-Starmer votes as a way, because obviously everyone rightly knows what's going on here. Why are you bringing a fox into the henhouse? Like you say, Andy Burnham's coming back for one reason, and every day in Westminster, we'd only be hearing about who's Andy Burnham sat with, who's Andy Burnham meeting with, how many meetings with MPs is Andy Burnham taking place. And then look at his record since he's been mayor and Keir Starmer's been prime minister. Andy Burnham spoke out against welfare reform. He spoke against winter fuel payment cuts, just to name two things, as well as a few other things that he's also spoken out against as well. And so the reality is, you would have left yourself with a figurehead at the very least within the Labour Parliamentary Party for rebellions. And Andy Burnham would have got you probably 60, 70, 80. And we know that 80 is the magic number in his Labour Party, which would have caused utter chaos. So you are correct that for the country's sake and for the Labour Party's sake, reputationally, to not have an internal warfare for the next 6 to 8 months is a good thing. But we all know the reality. No matter how much Labour ministers on the media around are telling us it's because Andy Burnham's doing a great job in Greater Manchester and he should remain as the mayor, although be it he did promise he wanted to do his full term. The truth of the matter is, Sir Keir Starmer knows that he has got to limit having as many rivals as possible, and that this now means he's basically now looking at Wes Streeting and Angela Rayner in the eye and going, if one of you two wants a job, come and get it.
So do you think this makes Starmer's position more secure then?
I think this helps him towards, you and I both predicting he will be there towards the end of this parliament, because Wes Streeting's in the cabinet. So is Wes Streeting going to resign? That's, as you know, James, a huge decision. You know it better than anyone because of who you've advised and worked for in the past. And then Angela Rayner, you're on the back benches, but do you want to wield the knife? You've got Keir Starmer saying there's a route back into government for you. Do you want to hang on?
How does she do it? I mean, that's the question to me: is how does she do it? The resignation thing. If you think back, we were both there at the end of Boris's time when Rishi and Saj went. Well, they went. They picked. They got in terms of what they wanted to do. I suspect, which is what I suspect they wanted to do without being able to read their mind. But an educated guess is they wanted to get Boris out. They did. But if Rishi had resigned on his own, or even just Rishi and Saj, I would question whether Boris would have gone at that point. I don't think he would. I mean, we both know people in number 10, and even after about 40 resignations, we were speaking to number 10 and they were saying he wasn't going to go anywhere. So I think TORY wouldn't have gone, and I don't think he would have gone. I mean, maybe more would have gone in a month later. Maybe they'd have gone for votes of confidence. Who knows? But I don't think he would have gone in those days as he did, if only two had gone. So the other thing is, again, when people talk about this, they say, "Oh, Wes Streeting might resign." It's like, okay, well, let's say we wake up tomorrow morning and Wes Streeting resigns. There's a secondary question, which is who else goes? Because if Wes Streeting resigns and the rest of the cabinet look at themselves and think, "Yeah, I don't really want a leadership contest now. Can't be doing with this," or whatever, then nothing happens because the prime minister doesn't have to go. The only way they can really force that is getting 80 people to back a kind of stalking horse, if you like, an alternative candidate. So I find it. That's why I listen to too many Labour people say to me they don't think he'll be there, which makes me not. I wouldn't bet the house that he's going to fight the next election. It doesn't give me supreme confidence. But the fact no one can really explain to me how he goes, and I think Burnham going, as you said, makes him kind of stronger.
It's going to be a fascinating time, and obviously the pressure will now be on if Labour do come third, if Labour do come behind Reform and the Greens. Let's see what happens. If Reform win the seat, it'll be toxic in some ways for Labour, but I actually think it'll be more toxic internally for Keir Starmer if the Green Party wins, because there's a lot of people on the soft left, as they're called, on the left of the Labour Party, who say we're pandering to Reform voters. They're not interested in us. They're never coming to us, but we are hemorrhaging votes, and largely, and which the data does back up in polling, more to the Greens and Liberal Democrats than we are to Reform UK. And we need to shore up our left flank more than try and chase the Reform vote. And so I think if the Greens win, Zach Polansky will love it, because his stated mission is very simple. We are here to replace the Labour Party, similar to what Reform UK is saying about wanting to replace the Conservative Party. He will then also say a vote for the Green is not a wasted vote. A vote for the Green actually does stop Reform, And if you want progressive centre-left politics, vote Green. And that will put huge pressure on Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana, and that left coalition to go, well, the momentum's behind the Greens. And what does Zara do? Because we know there's been bad blood in your party in terms of the Corbynistas and Zara Sultana. Maybe she does think, and Zach Blansky has said he would welcome her and Corbyn. Does she think actually it's time to get behind the Green Party instead? Is that going to be the vehicle for what she wants as a socialist government?
I do have one question for you. So I'm looking for an exclusive here from you. I have this is I will send it to you afterwards and prove it to you. I have a text. This is why we're talking from someone in the lobby. Hi, mate. Odd one, but have you heard rumours about Gullis being Reform's by-election candidate? So
I've got a feeling I might
drum
know who
roll.
texted you that, because
Okay.
I've also had a text from a member of the lobby asking me a very same question. The drum
Are
roll
you?
answer is no, I am
Ah,
not the candidate. Apparently, some of my staffers were assumed to be present at this, which I said is ironic because two people who work for me work for two Conservative MPs. Another one, both based in London. One works for a Conservative MP in Staffordshire Moorlands and is in work now, and another one's just finished working for a Conservative MP in London and is working now in the private sector. And the others in my office have all gone to jobs that are non-political, and quite frankly, they weren't really interested in sort of politico excitement that you and I were. They were just interested in the day job. So I find it quite amusing. No, I can. What I can tell you is, James, as you were asking me that question, is that Professor Matt Goodwin, a long-term sort of new Conservative supporter, very close with Danny Kruger, Miriam Cates, and myself, and has since then become also a GB News presenter. He has been unveiled as Reform UK's candidate for the Gaunton and Denton by-election. Now, interesting that they've gone for someone with some profile within the
with a
centre
lot
right.
of the thing I would say is I don't know if it's risky. The thing that would worry me from a comms perspective, he's on the record on a lot. There's a lot of quotes from him that they can play out. To your point, what was interesting to me about that, having only just heard it, is Matt has done. Matt's been in the public eye to a lower extent than an MP, but has done a lot of media for a decade. And to your point, the left is going to try and mobilise an anti-Farage reform vote, and Matt in particular is going to have a lot of stuff on the record that they might want to use in ads to move their base. That's quite an interesting pick.
It is an interesting pick, and we'll see how it plays out. I mean, I suspect Reform will go on the fact that he has got some profile. If it is a short campaign as it is, maybe it's better to go with a bigger name that can grab more media attention and is more adept to dealing with media in order to use every opportunity to their
There's going to be a
advantage.
lot of focus on this. They've moved it away from the locals, which means, we've both seen this before. If you move it into the locals, there's problems with that. But the plus side is it kind of blends in. Whereas this election is kind of 4 weeks for the lobby they'll be all up there within about a week, I imagine, doing vox pops and so on. So that you would need to withstand a lot of media attention. So maybe that's why they've gone for Matt.
Exactly. But now it'd be interesting who the Green Party select, because there is talk that Zach Polanski, although it seems that he's ruled himself out of that, he is a Greater Manchester resident in terms of born and bred. I think that would have been a really interesting. Maybe if the Greens win it, he'll come to regret he didn't throw his hat in the ring. You've also got Mothin Ali, I think his name is. He's the deputy, one of the elected deputy leaders. I don't think he's from Greater Manchester. I think he's more Leeds way, but there was talk he may be used. But then there's also apparently I think it's on Tameside Council. There's a Green councillor who's quite liked, and the rumor is that she may well end up being the candidate. But again, we will not know until next week when we record next, because that is going to be an announcement made later on this evening by Zach Polanski of who their candidate will be. But as you say, Matt Goodwin, I think Matt is punchy. He certainly doesn't hold his punches. He's very opinionated. And as you say, if you want to mobilise, and this constituency is quite interesting, I think it's the Denton side is kind of traditional red wally demographically. The Gaunton kind of side is much more sort of inner city Manchester, very diverse, much younger. There's a lot of university students and younger people living there than the average constituency. And as you say, Matt will have things on the record that if you want to say we're the progressive movement, look out these vile far right people that, Zach Polanski will be using as narrative and language. They'll be playing out clips. So I think it's going to be fascinating. And then Labour, the one big person I think people were hoping for was the leader of Manchester City Council, Bev Craig, if I remember her name correctly. But a lot of people were hoping, I think, she would run. She ruled herself out. Now, I think you and I both know you don't tend to rule yourself out unless you're certain you're going to win it. And Bev, I suspect, does have ambitions. I don't blame her for that. That's politics. But I suspect she's hoping for a seat that she'd be much more comfortable thinking, at least I'm in a two-way fight, and it's much more
On
likely to
that,
win than in a three-way fight.
I think interesting thing. So just, I think just to illustrate how close this could be, and just to have a quick look at some numbers. I was just kind of looking at the Runcorn by-election. So the Runcorn by-election was in the end won by Reform Sarah Pochin. She won by 6 votes, I think. Now the majority she had to overturn was over 14,500. So from 2020 in 2024, Mike Amesbury won that with a majority of 14,500. Reform finishing second on 7.5. So look, all seats are different. You know that better than me. Different demographics, different politics nationally, locally. The candidates do affect things. Are they a good, strong local candidate? Are they not? What happens in the campaign can affect stuff. But I think, the Gorton by-election is a smaller majority. It's 13.5, less than just under 13,500 it is. Less to turnover, bit more mixed underneath. You had Reform on 5,000, Greens on nearly five, Workers' Party on nearly 4, Tories on just under 3, Lib Dems under 1.5. And to your point, I mean, the one thing that strikes me looking at that is there's a quite clear, if you can capture a lot of the left vote, you're probably home and dry. Looking at that, I mean, I'm really interested for your take on this because you do a lot of work pouring through polls. I know, Jonathan. Looking at that, if you capture just the right vote on paper, you're not going to win that. I don't think. You're going to need some of the Labour vote to get you across. So Matt, I think he would be doing a good job to capture all the Tory vote and keep the Reform vote and turn out a few more voters. I think that would be a solid job. I don't think on paper that wins him that seat. So, or yeah, what happens? Does the
Yeah,
Labour vote collapse? It's a
I agree
really
with you.
interesting seat. But I think one thing it is really worth noting that the two things that strike me, if we go back and look at Runcorn, one, this is overturnable. It's just happened. Very similar size. Two, this could be really, really close. This could be 10 votes, 20 votes. This could easily be under 100 votes, right? So, and then you've won and lost elections. That's fine margins.
Yeah. I mean, look, so I was about to say, I agree with you on the element that you simply can't win it by just combining the Reform and Conservative votes. For Reform to win, you need to have the anti-Starmer vote. And part of that will be some Labour people who are maybe blue Labour, as we refer to them, traditional old Labour, so socially conservative, economically more left-wing. And if this election is motivated for those voters by social issues, which are things like immigration, for example, then Matt can certainly make a huge inwave into that. But Reform have also done a very good
And
job.
just with one thing we should also say, in case people don't know, so Matt Goodwin, I first met him when I was at YouGov. Matt has spent his entire professional career looking at polling. So if there's outside of his political views, if there's one thing that Matt knows, Matt's specialism is that what has been the Brexit vote, what was the UKIP vote, what is now part of the Reform vote, part of the Tory vote that they won in 2019. Matt's expertise is this voter base. That's worth remembering, I think.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And you got to assume he's therefore not taken this decision lightly and would have pored over all the data before probably thinking about putting himself
And he's thinking, how do you
forward
speak to people?
and how you speak to those people, which is why you're right. But the gut instinct is if the Green Party, for example, hoovers up their vote, Workers' Party vote with George Galloway's Workers' Party for Britain, I think it's called, and that left-wing Corbynista slash socialist slash soft left vote, particularly who are maybe angry and vexed at Burnham not even being allowed to run or want to see leadership change. And by the way, we have precedent for this. How many Conservative voters in May 2019 lent votes to the then Brexit Party over the EU elections as their last ditch attempt to force Theresa May out of office? Remember, the Conservative Party were absolutely smashed in those elections. And I know many Conservatives, including myself, who did give the vote to the Brexit Party in that election as a way of trying to get Theresa May out of office. And so we could see a similar thing here from progressive left wing voters going, this is our moment to basically pile the pressure on Labour MPs to say, you have to get rid of Keir. Otherwise, and as you know, Labour MPs will be looking at this with a lot of trepidation. I used to do the same when we had by-elections and the Conservatives were losing majorities of 20,000. They're looking at this, and if they see Reform going from 5,000 votes to 10,000 votes, and the Greens going, let's say, from nearly 5,000 to 12,000 votes, and Labour's vote suddenly down in the 6,000, 5,000, even less range, they're going to be sitting there going, well, my seat's not demographically too dissimilar to that. That's what that means for me. This is what's coming down the track. And those who want Keir gone already will just be further fuel on the fire to say he's got to go. Now, I still think it's unlikely we see a change before May. But the problem is, as you say, with this quick election, this by-election will frame now the conversation leading into the local elections, because it will now frame the discussion of, well, if Keir Starmer can't hold on to majorities in 13,500, what hope does he have in Wales? What hope does he have in Scotland? What hope does he have on councils, even in Greater Manchester, where there are going to be elections? It's going to be an interesting time. I think the telltale sign for listeners, see how much Keir Starmer personally goes to visit the constituency. Because if he's going frequently, like Boris Johnson went to Hartlepool, that tells you they're pretty confident they're going to win it. If we don't see Keir Starmer turn up at all, that tends to suggest that they think it's best to have the optics of the Prime Minister not there, because it will be more embarrassing when they lose.
No,
And
I don't want to
again,
get you in trouble. Does that apply? Would you apply that to Polanski and Farage, or
I
is
think
it
you can.
different when you're, or when you're on the kind of, they're not playing defense, if you like. They've got less to
Yeah.
lose. So I'm kind of trying to think from my job as a comms perspective. I think I would worry about it a bit less. I think if I was working for the PM, I would want to be able to detach him from what is a loss of your own seat. And so, or if I can see a big victory coming, like Boris had with Hartlepool, like I'd want to be like, we need to claim this as his victory, even if, frankly, this is just kind of fundamental shifts underneath. But I think if I was working for Farage or Polanski on this, I would see a bit less risk. I would be like, if there's any chance we win it, let's get him up there. Also, with the greatest of respect, and it's not really an attack. I mean, they are both of their best assets. It's where all the action's going to be. I want them in the national conversation. But would you see it the same way?
So I think Polanski, I would say to him, you're now living in Greater Manchester. Why not? Just absolutely go hell for leather. You're not an MP. You've got nothing to lose. And in fact, even if you come second and Labour come third, you get to say, all my chat, all my new members joining, all my social media gathering isn't just, in the Twitter sphere. This is
We're the
this
only
is
ones that
turning
can
into
take on
votes.
reform. Labour
We're the
can't
only
on
ones who
reform.
could take on
Yeah.
reform. If I'm Farage, I think there will be probably a bit more discussion now, because you don't want him to. I think Nigel Farage has shown amazing tenacity, right? He's probably one of the only figures in British politics who's not been disturbed by losing elections, right? I think, what was it, the 9th time of running for Parliament, he got elected to become an MP. That shows tenacity and that shows guts, because there's a lot of people that use that as a stick to beat him. I'm sure there'll be people internally going, if Nigel's there regularly and we don't win, people use that stick to beat him anyway. But my view would be, they're going to use that against you anyhow. Even if you don't win, they'll try and turn it into, oh, this reform's peaked or reform's done enough. And I think that's nonsense. So I would say to Nigel, you are the best asset. You will get the media in Westminster will follow you there. So if you want to grab the headlines nationally and locally, let's get you up there 2 or 3 times over the space of this 5-6 weeks. We'll have Lee Anderson, who's up there now announcing a candidate. We'll have Dr. David Ball up there. We'll have Richard Tice. Let's get Jenrick up there as well, to show that the team, the recent people who have defected, are all together and working as one. And I think it will be huge. But it's going to be, I'm going to be fascinated with the outcome and what it means. But I think for me, I agree with you. I think the risk is, for Polanski, I think there's zero risk. For Nigel, it's maybe 10%, like, just, but he's a big boy, he can shoulder that, and I don't think it'll bother him. All the risk is with Keir Starmer and the cabinet.
Yeah.
I mean, what does Wes Streeting do? What does Andrew Rayner do? Andrew Rayner's a Greater Manchester MP. How regularly is she going to be over there being publicly seen? Or is she going to keep her distance and then say...
She kind of, I mean, it's like the Burnham thing. Burnham himself and Rayner they can't be seen to wish ill, to hope they lose. But let's be honest, they hope that Starmer loses it, right? So they don't want to be there and be like, well, you couldn't even win this seat, or be able to be kind of attacked in that way. But they also they don't want to help him, but they can't stay away really totally, because people will
It's
say,
in their patch.
yeah.
And then Wes Streeting, he'll probably be very busy visiting hospitals up and down the country. He might not, I suspect, just be able to squeeze in his diary somehow. Maybe he'll just find a way of being conveniently too busy to visit specifically Gaunton or Denton. Albeit, obviously, Wes, we'd love to see you up there and telling everyone in the media that Labour can and will win it. And this is not a vote of confidence in Keir Starmer. And he has your full support because we all believe that. What was it John McDonnell said on LBC last night? He's never seen Wes Streeting attend so many fundraising dinners in his lifetime. He says that, so there you go. And we all know, James, that is another telltale sign. When people are working their membership and doing fundraisers, there's only one reason they're doing that to that extent.
Like when they suddenly discover their office can be used to host drinks for the lobby.
Yeah,
It's no, they normally aren't doing that out of the goodness of their heart.
no, exactly,
I
exactly.
would suggest. So I think interesting to see what happens. Well, I think we'll probably revisit this in the next few weeks because we'll get the candidates, we'll get visits up there, we'll get a bit of
There'll be
a
some polling, I'm
narrative.
sure.
But it's certainly kind of been. But one
I'll
thing
be
that
up there,
did
James, by
wash.
the way. So I will give the feedback to the pod from when I've been out on
Okay,
doors for Reform
maybe
UK.
we'll get a live one of you up there.
We'll
Although
try,
we
we'll
don't
try.
want to get in trouble with any electoral commission, but I think we're all right on that one. So the thing that kind of did slightly sweep that out because that dominated the news is another defection to reform. So obviously you are, I don't know if you've ever been described as a trailblazer, but since you moved across, we covered it on the pod before, but we had Zahawi and Jenrick, kind of
Andrew
different
Rosendale.
reactions. Andrew Rossendale,
And now,
um, and now we've got Suella Braverman, former Home Secretary, who was in, who I saw Rob Jenrick said, great to be back on the same team. I slightly tongue in cheek tweeted, I'm not sure they were even on the same team when they worked together in the Home Office.
oh, James, you're so
Which is
naughty.
I mean, I'm willing for that to be fact checked. I'm fairly sure there's some evidence that maybe they were briefing against each other, but who far be it for me to throw accusations around. But how did how did your inside reform? What's the view on the Suella move?
So Suella is very popular with the membership, a bit like Rob Jenrick. It has been wanted for some time. I think people think it's almost taken too long. They're shocked it's taken so long. But I think there was a point last year where Zia Yusuf and Reform were doing a lot around migration. And I think Zia was firing some shots at both Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick. And I suspect that maybe at that time put a pause on proceedings. I suspect Suella would have come a lot earlier had that not happened at that time. But I think it's also an inevitability, and I think actually I say this because Robert Jenrick, I think, was consequential in the fact that for those who consider themselves on the right of the Conservative Party, now have to, and this May 7th deadline that Nigel's saying is absolutely lock and solid, no questions asked whatever we think of that, that's what they're saying publicly. That for the right of the Conservative Party, there's now a very serious discussion going on about is the Conservative Party the vehicle for right wing politics and centre right politics, or is reform going to achieve its mission of taking over the centre right of British politics? And I think it is therefore likely that we may see one or two more. I still don't think lots more, but maybe one or two more sitting MPs continue that way if they think that's the direction of travel in terms of British politics and where their politics sits, because it is also debated, and I know we'll get into this, and we've discussed this when we're off the pod. There's a lot of media that would say, but Kemi Badenoch is also considered on the right of British politics. I myself have not disagreed that she's she's more on the right of the Conservative Party than most, and that policies like leaving the ECHR, for example, show that. And she's made it very clear that candidates will have to sign up to that if they want to run in the next election. But look, whether people want to believe this or not, reasons that I left were predominantly what we've seen since Robert Jenrick has left, crowing from people like David Gork, the Andy Street, Ruth Davison, prosperous setup, what are described as the wets by many people. I call them the One Nation Conservatives, or so-called One Nation Conservatives on the
I
left
don't
of the
think that's
Conservative.
the exact language you use to describe them. I'm not
Well,
sure we can use the exact.
I'm being PG. I'm being
Okay.
PG. But the one so-called One Nation Brigade, who are considered on the left of the Conservative
Mm.
Party, the crowing has meant that people like me have, I feel, in some ways validated that no matter what Kemi wants to do and say, that wing of the Conservative Party is never going to disappear. That wing of the Conservative Party is actually deeply rooted across many constituencies, nearly all constituencies, and positions of authority within the Conservative Party. And so, whilst I hear the rhetoric currently under Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative Party will end up back there at some
But what I'm
stage.
going to say to you is, I promise you are going to suffer from what they call confirmation bias, which is when someone makes a big decision, they look for things that reassure them they made the right decision. And so I can absolutely see when we saw, I think one thing we kind of didn't have it down on the list we could touch upon because it's directly related is this Andy Street, Ruth Davison. They called it Prosper, I think.
Prosper, yeah, Prosper, prosperous, yeah.
When you see things like that and the kind of the One Nation push, that you'll say, this is concrete proof that I made the right decision. It's a kind of normal human reaction to these things, and it may be true, but I think it may be not. It's the case that you'll look for these things. I mean, I think because to your point, to me, Suella hasn't seemed comfortable in the Tory party since the general election. I think if she's honest, it was probably before. Personally, I think that's why she really should be calling a by-election. I think this does raise big questions about by-elections, by the way, about switching parties. I don't think she'd necessarily. She might hold that seat now in a by-election. I don't know if she'd win it in a general for reform. But I think there's a few MPs that have called for this. But that's not an easy decision. Maybe not one to go into today. But I think her and Andrew Rossendale, most people. I saw Nigel Farage at the press conference say to, I think, a journalist, "Oh, could you have predicted this?" I mean, I didn't know it was going to happen today, but I think if someone had said to at the beginning of the year who's going to go to reform, Andrew Rossendale and Suella Braverman would have been pretty high on my list, and by high I mean the top two.
They'd have been higher than Robert Jenrick, wouldn't they?
They would have been higher than Robert Jenrick. Robert Jenrick was more surprised. Biggest surprise so far is still Danny Kruger to me. I think also because he went so early. But yes, Suella and Andrew, I don't think are a huge surprise. And the point I made, and this is really not to be critical of Suella and Andrew. My view, as you know, we've spoken about this, is I think if we just look at their views, and we look at Rob's views and the things they try to stand for as politicians, I think the Tory party needs to be a home for them. And I hope that we get to the point we are. And I think we can be. And I think
You want me
with
back, James,
Kemi,
do you? You miss me. You want me back.
no, I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't go that far. We want them back. I specifically never said you.
I noticed that. That's what I was trying to find out, James. I was trying to find out.
But I also think is in 5 years, are people going to look back and think that Andrew Rossendale or Suella leaving was decisive? I don't really think so, personally. And I think also, as much as I would hope that the Tory party can be a place for these different views, I don't think it should be out. I think they are broadly centre-right politicians like yourself. I think equally, if someone gets to the point they're that unhappy with their surroundings, then it is better for everyone to go. Same as if you're in a job or any kind of dynamic that you're in. I think if you really don't want to be in it for that long,
there's probably an
then you
argument,
should go.
James.
But we
There's
shouldn't
probably
we shouldn't delight in it.
I think
that's the thing I'm saying.
I think Danny Kruger has displayed the best attitude about going, where he has constantly said that it's not an easy decision. It's one that does sadden him, and one in some ways he regrets he felt he had to make in the end.
Yeah.
But one he felt because, like you say, he was uncomfortable. And look, it's the same for me. I've been a member of that Conservative Party for 18 years, my entire adult life until December last year. I've been a member of associations as a deputy chair political. I've been a council candidate and a councillor. I've been a parliamentary candidate and a member of parliament. I've toured the country when there were by-elections. I've donated hundreds of hours, thousands of hours, thousands of pounds, all to the cause. And as look, whether people again, I accept people will look at people like me and go, it's naked opportunism. They just want to come back to Parliament. And if people want to throw that at me, they're welcome to. But all I'd say is, to go to your point about confirmation bias, my challenge to that is, in the time I was a member of Parliament in Stoke-on-Trent, I had a predominantly Conservative-led council that were full of more of the One Nation type Conservatives, and were blocking what I thought were common sense policies to be applied locally or positions locally, and actually rebuking me for some of the things I was saying when actually they're now very much the mainstream view of the Conservative Party. And I look at them now, and they're now trying to claim that's their view. But I know for a fact it isn't from the conversations I've had with them. And again, that's why I have that issue with some of the Conservative MPs that sit there, because again, they voted against things like the ECHR bill that I laid on the floor of the House when it was just simply
I don't say
derogating.
this to be difficult, but I'm not trying to get you in trouble or anything. But since you mention it, you are sat with Nadeem Zahawi and Robert Jenrick, who were basic. I don't think many people would argue that they were almost a personification of David Cameron's Conservative Party in the early 2010s. Nadeem became an MP in 2010. I think he was on the A list, kind
Yes,
of
he was. Yeah.
prime Cameroon. And Robert Jenrick was certainly presented as a kind of, I think he was a kind of favourite of a lot in the One Nation group, and I don't say that to denigrate them at all. Like I think, Rob did go into the Home Office, did see how things work, and did say, and that did challenge some of his views. And I think in life, if we say people can never change their views, this is the road to rack and ruin. That's obviously completely crazy. But but it's not the case that people can't change how they think. I mean, you're sat with people who did, and you accept them for that.
No, but the difference is that Rob, for example, did go on a very clear journey, did actually resign from the government because he felt that he couldn't win the argument when it came to tackling immigration. And I think did in a very decent job of outlining where the Conservatives went wrong in lots of detail, particularly again on the immigration issue. I think Nadeem, for example, is one that he was always quite outspoken when it came to business and taxation, for example, and I think did present a lot with the Adam Smith Institute, which he was involved with in terms of alternatives ideas. So I do think that these people stuck their head above the parapet. So you're right. It was wrong of me to say people can't change their views. What I'm saying is that from those I've seen locally and those I know sat on some of those Conservative backbenches, the thing I've heard too many conversations in private where I know what they really think, and that is their actual position, and they've never presented to me any evidence that when they have changed it or when they suddenly say publicly a different view to what they've held, that is a genuinely held belief or view, more rather than just one for survival. Now, look, the risk for reform absolutely comes back to this. Is this Conservative Party 2.0? I think it's inevitable if you're trying to replace the Conservative Party and be the party of the centre right, then you're going to have a large amount of conservatism in it, whether those are Conservative MPs, Conservative councillors, or Conservative members who have joined Reform UK. But what's important is that everyone's aligned behind the mission and the vision and the values of what Reform UK stands for. And hopefully, we're not ingrained in any of those, what I thought were far too consequential arguments on certain policy areas like the ECHR that have happened over the last 10 years, particularly, I suppose, my time in
But let me
Parliament.
slightly challenge you. Just on this thing. To me, this is made easier when you say, "Oh, we're starting afresh." So it's kind of, in a way, where we are now. It's like January. Start going to the gym. I went to the gym this week. It's absolutely packed, rampacked. And in a way, that's like starting a new party. It's the kind of January gym of politics. So there's no problems. We've got a
Wish I
totally
looked like I've
fresh
been to the
start.
gym.
Yeah, well, me too, mate. There's no evidence of it. But in a way, like what this thing is a lot. So I'm not to say you're totally wrong, and I admit I think it's a worry of mine as a conservative. I don't like seeing there were comments which were basically like, "Oh, great! Now I think they used the word now the nutters have gone. We can kind of get back to being a Tory party." I said both on Twitter and in private messages to people in the Conservative Party, this is the quickest. If you want to end the party, carry on. Because if we're just writing all these people off, we ain't be winning an election. Because we're not. Even if you think David Cameron's the greatest thing in the world, we're not in 2010. We're in a different world. The platform that Thatcher stood on in 79 wouldn't win an election now. Blair's in 97 wouldn't, and David Cameron's in 10, 15 wouldn't. We're in different circumstances. So I think incredibly short-sighted way to go. But I also think some of this stuff is just by nature of having been around a lot, been
Yeah,
around
yeah.
people a lot. And so I think it's a bit easy to feel like you're in a new party. And again, I don't mean this critically. There's a lot of policy which is sketched out at the top, not super developed at the beginning, at the bottom, sorry. And therefore there's less arguments about it. And so I I think that you can get into government like that. Labour got into government with virtually two policies. And so, and I, if you do, I wish you all the success. There's a lot of people that I like you and Danny in there,
Oh, we'll
and
go on the
the
record, ladies and gents. We've got on the record again. He does
yeah,
like me. That's
exactly.
yeah.
Well, it's the first time I put it on camera, I think. But equally, so maybe this will all be fine. I'm not saying it to write it off, but my caution would be this: when you don't put a lot of meat on the bone, it's easy for everyone to sit around and agree, because like me and you agree on a lot of stuff. We both agree that the Tories didn't do it. The Tories took their eye off the ball slightly on immigration. Blame aside, the numbers were too high. We both agree that we didn't do enough to tackle some of the overregulation and quangoisation of British politics, and the Tories didn't do enough. And whether or not we did do enough, we need to do a lot now. Right? We both agree with that. We both agree the economy's got major problems. We both disagree with what Bridget Phillipson's doing with the education system, and we both want to see more of the Michael Gove stuff and that developed onwards. And you've done great work on the impact. When we get to some detail of policy, that's where you
Yeah.
can have some disagreements. You guys haven't got there yet, is what I would point out.
Yeah, well, look, I'd argue both the Conservatives and Reform haven't got fully fledged plans fleshed out yet at this moment in time. And I think that's the benefit now of actually using the time before what I anticipate will now probably be a 2028, 2029 general election, is that both parties are going to have to put their ideas forward. And the big test, Reform will be held to a higher standard, I think, than most to show, partly because of where the polling is at the moment. So, rightly, the challenge should be, if you are on the cusp of potentially being in government, what's the plan? And I think in particular, the lobby in Westminster have definitely learned the lesson of having given Labour, I think, what was a pretty easy ride, and then
Yeah.
realising these guys have come in and have no plan. I think they've now learned that lesson as well, and will be intrinsically looking for more substance and detail behind ideas.
And maybe
Actual
the electorate have got, I think there's a lot
zero
of
trust now. Zero trust now.
patience.
Patience.
We've
Yeah, you're
seen
right.
it. I think Labour came in with a lot of goodwill, and I think there was a
Change,
probably,
change, change.
and I think people have said, I've seen a lot of the new Blairites say, well, it took Labour a couple of years to get going, which may be true, but I think the public don't give them that patience anymore. I think where there was that willingness to do it, I think they say, well, you said the Tories were really dodgy, but you didn't sack your chancellor when she had a dodgy CV. You know, you said the Tories made too many U-turns. Now you've made 13 U-turns. And so we can, don't take my word for it. Look at the prime minister's least
Popularity rating.
joint popular prime minister in 50 years.
I think one poll shows he's less popular than Hamas, which is
Yes,
quite
which
extraordinary.
is quite some going. Well, but I think you or whoever wins the next election, I think you would suffer from the same thing.
Yeah, no, I think,
Would
and look, by the way, Nigel Farage has accepted. I think he actually said at a press conference, he said we'd have no more than a year to show quite serious change, at least in some serious policy areas, if the voters are going to stick with the rest of the program. I think you're right. I think people are going to have less and less time, and that's why there's going to be a real need for substance, and actually goes back to the heart of what Danny wants to do in Reform UK, and I suppose Neil O'Brien's doing, to be fair, in the Conservative Party, which is, if we go into government, how are we going to change the mechanics of government to enable us to quickly enact policies that we need to enact so we can show delivery? Because in itself, trying to change the mechanics of how Westminster works could be, you can easily get bogged down in that for years and therefore miss the actual retail side of the politics that you need to in order to keep trust with the voters. How you do both side by side, I think, is going to take an extraordinary amount of an understanding. And I think Danny and Neil are both big brains in their respective parties, and were both big brains when they were both in the same party. And I think it will be fascinating to see who's able to put that together, that in a way that the voters will go, that's the idea that we trust the most.
I think interesting that you mentioned Neil. I think just to touch on, I think before we go, what's been commented is that now Reform have more members, I think, of Liz Truss's cabinet than the Conservatives do on their front bench. So I think more members of Liz, not that you have more members who are now members of Reform, but if you compare our front bench with how many people are with Reform who were in Liz Truss's cabinet, you now have more, which is an interesting kind of pithy, political thing. But to me, the serious point in that is, put the attack on Reform aside, I do think this whole process is providing Kemi with an interesting opportunity to promote some of those people. We talked about this off the pod earlier. I was saying to you, is one thing I think with Rob Jenrick is I think he was great at comms and he was communicating clearly to the public. Yes, we got it wrong in immigration and this is what we should do. I think there's a bit of a gap in that area now, and I think there's a space for someone like Katie Lamb, who's a bit of a rising star in the party, got a lot of kind of credit around party conference, and I think we'll do again, as you know, when at some point. I think there's a chance, and you mentioned Neil O'Brien. To me, and Nick Timothy was the person who was promoted in Rob Jenrick's place as a shadow MOJ. To me, the interesting thing is, they're all Neil O'Brien's. When was he elected? Was he 19?
He's
Must have been
2017.
17 in the Theresa May election.
So Kemi's cohort as well.
Kemi's cohort. I think there are three people. If listeners don't know them, that are people that in the Tory party would be seen as talented, capable, all have some experience of government actually, so they very much know how things work. Strong policy brains. Also, I think are showing in their own ways. They get comms. I don't think Neil O'Brien's maybe not showy, but he really does communicate. To me, he communicates data especially well across his blog and social media. Nick has a column. Nick Timothy has a column in the Telegraph. He's a very eloquent, persuasive writer.
And the stuff he did, by the way, on West Midlands, I think shows you how that is not an easy thing to campaign on, right? To make that understandable. I mean, Nick Timothy, single-handedly, let's be frank, is the reason the Chief Constable of West Midlands Police is no longer is resigning.
Exactly. And I think...
Not sacked, though, James. Shabana seemed to not find the courage there.
But I think the interesting thing is the fact is most people won't know those three, i.e. they are fresh faces to the public. And that's where I think there's an opportunity for Kemi to show, hey, this is a new party. In a way, I think if you lean in and look for silver linings of defectors, that is a defector to say, we're a change party. These people have gone. Here's our new people. As you know, I also
by the way,
there's a Liz Truss size problem somewhere. But if you put that aside, I think you can show.
Well, to back you up, it was reported quite early on, I think about a year ago, and those three names are on what Reform UK privately allegedly there's a list of names of MPs, and those three names are on Reform UK's list as well. Now, I think that tells you in itself that for Reform UK, they also acknowledge that talent. And I think if we can convince those people to come and join us, we would be able to then definitely say this is the only party now of the centre right, and the bright young things of conservatism that were coming forward believe the home of conservatism is in Reform UK, not in the Conservative Party. And that would be probably the best way for then Nigel Farage to do what his stated aim is, which is to see the end of the Conservative Party. And as you and I both acknowledged, for Reform UK to get that 35% mark, you have to keep squeezing the Conservative vote. And those type of people would be able to probably help you win over some of those lifelong Conservative voters who are sort of swaying slightly, but put off by certain elements of Reform UK at the moment, or don't see enough substance that they think
probably
is
you.
Probably me. Probably me. Thank you, James. Oh, great. Well, I'll,
on that bombshell.
On that bombshell. I've got nothing else to say now. On that bombshell, James Starkie continues to be a great friend of mine and has full faith and belief in me. That's apparently clear. But look, we thank you once again all for tuning in. Maybe next week will be quiet. The Prime Minister's in China. David Lammy's doing PMQs tomorrow.
Could go wrong.
What could go wrong? So we'll wait to find out there. And of course, will there be any more defections? We'll find out. Thanks for tuning in, and you make sure you listen in for our next pod soon.
Thank you.